Welcome to Discover Lafayette. I'm Jan Swift. Discover Lafayette focuses on the people and rich culture of Lafayette, the gateway to South Louisiana in the region we call Acadiana. Today's show is generously underwritten by Lafayette Convention and Visitors Commission. There's no one that documents our local culture here and in Louisiana and in our region than Philip Gould, documentary architecture photographer who's made Louisiana his home and favorite subject since 1974. Philip has photographed throughout our state, our nation, Europe, Mexico, and the Caribbean. As a rule, he prefers long, in-depth, multi-year projects that typically end up as photographic books. Philip's work has been published in over 20 books many of you may be familiar with. A recent book is Ghost of Good Times, Louisiana Dance Halls, Past and Present, The Public Art of Robert Dafford, and two of my favorites, The Louisiana Houses of A. Hayes Town and Louisiana's Capitals, The Power and Beauty. Most recently, Philip Gould has undertaken a documentary project tentatively entitled Bridge the Mississippi, Spans Across the Father of Waters, a portrayal of architecture and humanity along the many 225 spans across the Mississippi. Philip, I'd like to thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And as we spoke about before, I'm humbled by the body of your work, and I'd really love to hear your story about what brought you to Louisiana and what led you to document all of the iconic cultural items that we enjoy here. So,
well, first of all, Louisiana as a subject is a very generous subject. The bounty of my work, I keep photographing, and I keep going out and photographing in Louisiana and elsewhere, and every time I go, I see something different, and you know, it's great. You know, you can go to the same place and see it 5 different ways. You know. But
you moved here in the early 70s, mid to early 70s, yeah.
I was a photojournalism student at San Jose State University, where I grew up in the Bay Area, California, and took a job sight unseen, Daily Iberian, New Iberia, Louisiana, and
what a cultural shock, huh? Coming from
yes, from
California.
San Francisco. Counterculture to New Iberia with the bayous and all that, but you know, it had its charms, and it was certainly an interesting place. And I felt it was a place that was probably as different as possible within the context or the confines of the continental U.S.
Right.
To go from, like I said, the left coast to the low coast.
Yeah. I know when I moved here in the early 80s, many people were still speaking French, you know, in the courthouses, and that just had to be really such a different scene for you.
I liked it. I mean, you know, I have an international streak, and so there were a lot of French teachers here at the time, so you really had a sense of this place being not only local and sense of the community, but also you had people from all over the French-speaking world here.
Right.
And that was also a treat.
Right.
So
you stayed in New Iberia for a while, and
18
then
months.
Moved to Dallas for a short stint.
Was offered a job for the Dallas Times-Herald. Moved there in the fall of '75, and just started working there. Dallas Times-Herald is a big daily newspaper, no longer with us, but you know, Dallas is the big D is the fast lane, and you know, it's a money-making town, and for all the interesting things about Texas, I was just, my mind and my heart was still in Louisiana. One time I took a trip, the first trip I took back to Louisiana after I moved there, several months later, I heard about this wedding that was going to be in French in Abbeville. I said, I should go to that. I went there, and there's older couple, I think they were from Delcom, Walter and Effie Landry, and so they had the wedding ceremony, and you know, choir sings in French. It's all the vows are in French, everything. They come out and they go over to this wagon, horse-drawn wagon, where they're going to be carried to the reception, I guess. And
Cinderella and Prince Charming.
There you go.
Yeah. And I don't mean that in disrespectfully. It was beautiful.
Yeah, the elderly version. But the way that lady, Miss Effie, got up into the wagon, she pulled up her bridal dress, jumped up there like she was wearing pants and boots, and I said, that is a wonderful spirit. Big old smile on her face. And that photograph, I went back to Dallas and actually published an article about the wedding in the magazine there. But that photograph just haunted me. It stayed with me, and she became my siren. You know, she was the one. You belong over here.
That's wonderful.
When are you coming back? You know,
because you just don't see that. I mean, that's not something you would see. But when people see the picture, when we put it on the screen, it's. I mean, she was beaming. Beautiful with those glasses and, like you said, pulling up her dress and ready to start life.
We're having fun here.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, I just loved her positive energy and sense of enjoying life.
Right.
And you know, they enjoyed life differently in Texas.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
So you moved back?
Moved back, 1978.
In Lafayette?
Without a job, just started freelancing and started working on a project documenting Cajun culture. That eventually became a book called Acadiana d'Astor, or with a bilingual title, In Today's Cajuns. And so I went around all over South Louisiana, down to Bayou Lafourche, you know, everywhere, and just photographed Cajun culture and photographed those things, aspects of the culture which distinguishes Cajuns and Creoles to an extent from other parts of America. You know, professions or music or lifestyle, cooking, boucheries, you name it.
I know that you've worked with academics such as Barry Onslet and Carl Brasso. Did you work with them early in your career, or did you build those relationships as you were out documenting what you saw? Was there a partnership?
Well, I met Barry first. Carl I met later on, but you know, back then there were all kinds of people who were coming to South Louisiana to document Cajun culture, and Barry's head was the highest on the horizon.
Really?
You need to talk to Barry. Okay. So I went and talked to Barry, and you know, over time, a relationship and friendship developed, and you know, he's very helpful, and always a good critic of not only the photographs but also my approach. You know, it's just, you know, you ought to consider this or you ought to consider that while you're at it, you know, or this. But I think he sensed that I was really serious, and that he felt I had an empathetic eye for the culture here. I was not out to make some statement about the crazy nut jobs, all that. I mean, I was really trying to capture the heart and the spirit of the area. And so he was supportive.
Good.
And as was Elmore Morgan.
Yeah.
And you know, James Edmonds, Susan Hester. I mean, there was a bunch of people who were there as friends at the beginning, and I just kept at it.
Right. I know when you moved back, Codafil had been formed in the late '60s, and there was that budding movement to raise awareness of the whole Acadian culture and lifestyle and heritage. And so you really were here right at the cusp of much bigger focus than just a local, you know, Cassandalay or something. You were capturing the historical aspects of what we have here.
When I first got here, that was just beginning. The first Cajun Music Festival happened 2 weeks after I arrived in Louisiana.
The timing was incredible.
Hello, wow. And you know, people were kind of aware. I mean, but you know, they didn't think of themselves, well, I'm a Cajun, wow. You know, they just went about their business, you know, and you know, there's sort of a subconscious or just an unaware sense of what they are. That changed in the you know, late 70s, early 80s. You know, bands like Beau Soleil, you know, Clifton Chenier, all these folks started to get a real national following. And so the country became aware of Cajun culture, in part because of Paul Prudhomme and his national celebrity. Blackened redfish.
But you only wanted to eat it here.
You know, no Cajun's going to go get some redfish, at least back then, and you know,
put pepper all over it.
Yeah, let's burn the fish, No, no. They just,
And you definitely didn't want to eat at New York or San Francisco. I know.
Maybe not.
I know.
No. So
Yeah.
anyway, so it was, a time of great fervent and great ferment, and people were, Mulots was going strong. It was just all kind of there,
Right.
and the world was waking up to this, and Zachary Richard played a major role. Did a song. He did a lot of the traditional Cajun songs, but he also wrote his own. He wrote a song called Réveil, Wake Up in French, and it was about the British deportation of the Acadians from Nova Scotia. But it was also about now, the underlying message was, you people in the present better wake up as well.
Yeah, right.
And it was incredibly popular in Quebec because they were going through a very cultural, linguistic period as well, political period. I mean, they almost seceded from Canada.
Right.
Not to get too far afield here, but...
No. I was just thinking, you're talking about Zachary Richard, and I know your friend Robert Dafford. So many of our local artists
Dafford was right there starting at the same time.
Yeah, and they're known internationally, and I don't know if a lot of people realize that our culture is revered. I mean, people they know them across the world, not just here in the U.S.
I think Louisiana is a very interesting, different place in the country, but there's a ton of different places in the country. I mean,
Right.
go to Florida, every county is a different place. But with Haitians or Cubans or all of South America, what have you. But this place is particularly different,
Right.
and it has a great story.
I wanted to get in some of your books. I know that you prefer working on projects where you can really document the whole story, and
More in depth.
More in depth. Some of your early books, I didn't really go through everything, but you have captured so much about the Cajuns and the Acadians. Do you want to talk about some of the other early books? And
Well, after there was a book I did on the state, which called Louisiana Land Apart. It was all right, just traveling around this, and it would be a different book today. There's a book I did called Cajun Music in Zydeco, which is going back,
Right.
but with a more musical focus. And the funny thing about that book is that it came out just before Beau Jacques and this whole new wave of Zydeco guys came onto the scene. And so the book was rendered historic
Almost
the moment
immediately.
it was published.
Right.
Which is, that's just the way it goes.
another book,
Oh, help.
I know.
Yeah. But so that one, I did a book on the Capitol buildings.
I love that one. I brought a copy of that with me. We were talking before filming. I didn't realize I was there when you had signed my book in 1995, when this old state capitol was reopened and had been refurbished. And your book beautifully documents both the current state capitol and the original. Well, the old state capitol wasn't the original, but the old state capitol. And
the
gorgeous.
culture of the buildings, the architecture, the politics of the architecture, and what each style meant about the prevailing culture of the day. The old state capitol was straight out of the feudal period. It was actually Gothic revival back in the 1850s, but it represented a very not a feudal area, but where the people on top ruled, and bam, that was it.
It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful site used
I love
today
it.
for
Anyone
weddings.
who hasn't been should treat themselves. And then the tower, the Art Deco tower built by Huey Long was, I always think of it as a monument to the people and the omnipotence of the state. It's both populist and powerful at once. And I remember when my boys were growing up, one of the field trips that they loved to go, like on their birthday or whatever, was to go to Baton Rouge. First stop, of course, is the USS Kidd, so they can shoot all the guns on the boat. And then they went to the old state capitol and
Went
looked
to the
around.
top,
And then
it's so beautiful. The inlay, everything is just so ornate, and it's
it's
easy to
beautiful.
just take it for granted because it's everywhere you look. There's rich
yeah,
architecture.
you're living in the middle of history when you go in that building. And then so from there we would go over to the Huey Long statue, and of course a game of throwing a football around on that little area there. You know, and then we would go into the Capitol building, look around, and go up to the tower and look out over the Mississippi River. What an amazing
it's gorgeous.
point of view that is.
Right.
I remember we were down throwing the ball down by the Huey Long statue. There's a beautiful field, small field there, and some gentleman, probably 45 years old, is walking towards the Capitol with his wife and his mother-in-law, most likely. I love mother-in-laws.
Yeah.
And he saw us. He said, "Oh my God, I used to do that when I was a kid. Just let me throw one pass." I said, "Sure." So I threw him the ball and whack, and then one of my sons went out, picked
Fun
it
memory.
up and but I mean it just.
Yeah.
And then his wife, said, "Well, this is who he is," and the mother's going,
I know. What can we do?
These people who just can't quite rid themselves of their boyhood, But anyway.
Well, they're missing out on life. I know.
But
it's a beautiful place. We have a beautiful Capitol, and your book captures the pictures, and it brought back so many memories for me, Philip, because you really captured the days. Some of the pictures you had were when Edwin Edwards was still in his heyday, and John Hankel, I had to laugh. He was Speaker of the House, and he's still active as President of the Senate. It's like some things never change.
Yeah, John Alario.
John Alario, excuse me. Yeah, John Hankel was Speaker of the House back then, and Alario, you have pictures of him.
He is a master of defying the term limit laws.
He's a survivor.
He just keeps running for the House. 10 years in the House, go to the Senate. 10 years in the Senate,
and still
House.
Powerful.
And he's an amazing man and knows
looks the
a
same.
ton. And if anyone knows how the state works, he does.
Right.
And it's pretty.
It's an interesting
impressive.
book.
Yeah.
And the other book I wanted to mention, and we'll get into your new work, but the A. Hayes Town book, the Louisiana Houses of A. Hayes Town that you put together with Cyril Vetter is beautiful, and it captures the residential designs of A. Hayes Town, who's was from South Louisiana originally, and
born in Lafayette.
And it's just a beautiful book that many people locally, I think, they can drive around and see the vestiges of his teachings. I mean, we use his work.
He basically set the standard for residential architecture, especially neo-traditional residential architecture in the state.
Reclaiming bricks, old timber,
bricks,
and
columns, spaces. He's an amazing man. I got to know him when he was in his early 90s, and he was still practicing.
Was he?
Oh yeah. I mean, wasn't in a huge practice, but he was going. And we became good friends, and he helped me. We took run around to a few places, and I kept showing him stuff. And he said, "That's great, my boy. That's really good." But his house was almost a laboratory. He would build buildings in the backyard as sort of like prototypes for buildings that he would put in other people's yards. He had one room which was a Spanish room, they called it, and it was just a building outside the house. And it was kind of his office, but it was a room, and you would think that this is the size of a room that a Spanish colonial governor for Louisiana or Mexico would have. It's just a perfect size. It's large enough, not too big, but there's a stateliness to it. He had every path, trees come up, there would be statuary at the end, so that you could focus through the bushes, what have you, and to the statuary. And there were always these line of sights.
So everything was really well thought out. Yeah.
He had an amazing sense of placing the house. He had an amazing sense of making the inside feel like you're outside and the outside feel like you're inside.
Right.
The porches were seriously had the overhang of the roof went way out, so the porches were deep inside
and comfortable from
and
the
comfortable
sun.
and it was just amazing. The houses, the Hayes Town houses themselves are treasures for the state, and there are I think there's about 500 of them.
Probably so.
And mostly here, and also in Mississippi to a degree.
And in my work, researching for Discover Lafayette, I made the connections we were talking about where Haystown actually inspired Maurice Hyman to invest in the land where the oil center is, and he was the architect for the oil center, and I just never knew that.
Well, they were very good
flat,
friends.
It's such a different look than his homes that he
The
designed.
UL Alumni Center, which was Mr. Hyman's home, was built and designed by Haystown, and you know, he also did that. He's done a lot of houses in Lafayette. You know, he did several churches. He did the Ascension Church downtown, which I think is a beautiful masterpiece. It's really fine. And a whole host of others. I'm drawing a blank, but you know, so actually the UL Art Museum is going to be doing a big exhibit on his work.
That's what I heard. Luann Greenwald was trying to locate local homes that could be on the you know, in the exhibit. So
sure. Anyway, but you know, Mr. Town, I once told him he had the art. He really looked to Europe, you know, Spain, France, whatever, and also to Latin America, to Mexico, for inspiration, for artifacts. And I once told him, he didn't talk a lot about his work. He was great for stories. I remember when I was, you know. And,
what an experience to
oh
get to
my
know
goodness!
him.
But one time I said, Mr. Town, you have the architectural soul of a Spanish Monsignor. That's it. That's it. You know.
You got it. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I mean, that I understood what he's doing. So anyway.
Look, we have about 3 minutes left, and I would be remiss if we did not talk about your current project.
Sure.
Bridge the Mississippi is your working title. Spans across the Father of Waters.
Sure.
And you were actually documenting the Mississippi, 225 or so spans.
Well, there's 225 bridges across. I'm focusing on the 75 that are most interesting or historic, or what have you. And it's an absolutely wonderful project. You know, the river is 2,300 miles long.
Right.
So I'm all the way up to the headwaters in northern Minnesota and down through Minneapolis, St. Paul, you know, all the way down. And what I really am looking forward to is that most people know the bridges in their town, or maybe a few others. We know the bridges in Louisiana, for example, in large measure. But we don't have a clue as to what's up in St. Louis or you know, further upstream. And there's just a lot of absolutely beautiful bridges. You know, it's an integration of architecture and humanity. It's because there's a world around them.
Right.
You know, whether you're on a tugboat, or whether you're in a train, or whether you're crossing in your car, or whether you live under it, or whether you're running a bar just at the foot of the bridge. You know, and there's so much sense of the history that is still there in these spans. I remember one of the bridges that gave me the idea. I was with Robert Dafford, actually. We were crossing the bridge at Cairo, Illinois, going to Kentucky, to Paducah, Kentucky, where he has a bunch of murals. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. It was freezing cold outside, and you know, suddenly I'm on this bridge that seems really narrow, and there's something about the span, and like you're going through a time tunnel, and I just said, there's something here. I don't know what it is, but you know, I gotta look into this. And you know, lo and behold, you know, there was indeed something there. And you know, the Mississippi River is the longest and arguably the most important river in the country. And you know, I see the project as a different way of looking at the Mississippi River. So anyway.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that. I know it takes several years to pull a book like that together, and I really think with our time restraints, I would love to have you back on where we can talk more in depth about some of what you've documented culturally, but I wanted to have this opportunity to have you, Philip Gould, on the show and introduce you to people that may know of you but not know about you. So thank you so much for taking time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank you also for watching Discover Lafayette. This show and all of our shows can be found on the website discoverlafayette.net. This is also a podcast that you can subscribe to on iTunes or any place that you get your podcast. On behalf of Discover Lafayette, I'd also like to thank LCVC for supporting our program. I'm Jan Swift with another episode of Discover Lafayette. Thank you.